Hi, thank you for clicking on the video. If you haven't already, go ahead and check out Crossed Part 1 and 2. Links in the description, and there should be something that either has popped up or is popping up on screen right now. With that out of the way, let's get straight into number 6. So this one opens up with a striking page of a horse, quite a few cuts on its body, dragging a severed leg, running along a trail. Our survivors are next to that trail, hiding in bushes, where we have a new member of the group whose name is Brett. We'll get into Brett shortly, but for now, Brett is questioning why they're staying still after the horse has gone by. Sydney tells him to shut up as the actual Crossed group that is tailing the horse approaches. This particular group of Crossed are quite well armed looking, carrying rifles as well as numerous melee weapons. However, one behind them seems to be dragging his leg, starts to make some sort of grunt or moan. The rest of the group turns around to look. The leader silently approaches and hacks off the top of his skull, with the wounded Cross then collapsing to the ground, continuing to grunt as he stares directly at Stan, who gets ready to fire his pistol. Sydney stopping him, telling him to be quiet. The Crossed group moves on as the wounded one bleeds out and dies. They obviously sit and wait, and after Sydney confirms that it's been over an hour, they get to moving, where Brett then comments that he had to restrain himself from laughing when the thing plopped down in front of Stan. Stan then narrates on his opinion on Brett and how he came to the group, saying that Joel from before seemed like fun company compared to Brett, but that when he had met them, he had a stash of food and gear that was so great that even despite him being a complete prick, they took him since all he asked for in exchange was to be able to go along with them. And that they had ran into him west of Denver when he came upon their group. We then end the narration with Brett commenting on how the Crossed don't seem to be taking care of themselves, and that the plan for Alaska seems like a smart idea. We then get more narration that explains Geoff and Kittrick made it through the mountains. Geoff was the first to recover, and he helped Kittrick get back to health. We then cut back to the group's conversation, where Brett is asking what Kittrick's problem is, why he's so mopey all the time, where Stan then narrates Kittrick's actual backstory, and we finally actually get to learn something about him for once, with Stan stating that Kittrick got it worse than anyone he had ever heard of. Flashback goes to Kittrick laying in the water on the beach as his wife calls out to him saying that she heard a strange radio broadcast. While she's trying to explain what she heard and ask if she should get the family moving, a man strolls up on the beach, and before anyone can respond, hacks her head clean off in one swing. As Kittrick tries to rush to shore, a group of Crossed come upon his children and immediately begin hacking them apart, as an infected police officer then draws a gun and begins to fire at him. He dives into the water to avoid the shots when the Crossed throw in his wife's decapitated head into the water after him. Patrick then explains that first night they ran into him, he couldn't stop talking about it, but then the morning after, he never said anything he didn't have to, and it was a completely different person, obviously. And now we know why he has been silent this whole time, and hardly ever gives any input. We then cut to later on when the group is taking shelter in a building of some kind, discussing the next steps in their plan, stating that it was Randall's idea to find a boat and avoid the border that way. And they're all in agreement that that is not going to work anymore since none of them know how to sail. And in order to avoid detection, they're going to have to go too far out to sea for them to handle. And as well as if there's Crossed with a boat that's faster or bigger, they're going to be screwed. Brett then asks what's the deal about the border and why they have to avoid it, where they explain what Randall told them in an earlier issue. He calls that crap because any infected Cross on the border wouldn't be waiting there. They would go out hunting, or all the military personnel that got infected would wipe each other out. Sydney tells them that doesn't matter, and that they need to still continue to avoid the cities and should avoid the coast, as that leaves them in less directions to run in. Geoff then proposes going into the desert. Brett also questions that, where Geoff gives the point that there'll be a lot of open space they're able to spot trouble from miles away, and that since the Cross don't take care of themselves, generally speaking, much like the mountains, it's going to be a death trap for them. Brett, of course, is upset at the idea of trekking through the desert, questioning if they would even be able to actually do it, and that Geoff's point about the desert being a death trap for them doesn't matter, because if any Cross see them and follow them into the desert, they're just going to continue to chase them anyways. Where Stan then steps in and dresses Brett down for being negative and just complaining without offering a solution. Where then Brett points out that he's been supplying the group with food and supplies, and he has a right to voice his input. Sydney then interrupts, saying that if they're going to go through the desert, the key is going to be having access to water, with Geoff commenting that there'll be a bit more infrastructure than they're expecting scattered around the desert. Brett is upset at the plan. Stan tells him to shut up, and before he can continue the argument, Sydney reminds him that his watch is next, where he then, what appears to be in a very pouty way, goes out to relieve Thomas. Stan fills Thomas in on the plan, and Thomas is surprisingly optimistic, holding on to this optimism seeing as how they made it through the mountains and that Kittrick survived it. So he doesn't believe that dehydration would be the thing to take him out. He then tells Stan that the dog that's been following them is back again. You then get a moment where Stan sits here and talks to the dog, telling it that it's probably useless, but it can't be that useless since it's managed to survive on your own, but that it shouldn't make friends with him because he's going to lose everything. The dog continues to approach him anyways, and well, he caves in and takes it in. The next day, Sydney informs him that the dog is going to be his responsibility, and that he needs to be ready to put it down if it makes a noise at an inconvenient time, as well as the fact that he's going to be the only one who's going to be up to feeding it. Patrick then asks what's the dog's name, and Stan tells Patrick that he can name the dog, which causes Geoff to comment on how he finds the current situation that the group is currently in nice, clarifying that he doesn't mean the world trying to end, but that the moment they're having right at this point is nice, as well as commenting that he feels like the group have become his friends and that he hasn't really ever had any before. Stan asks him why, and he just says he's not really like other people, and then asks if the group minds him talking about it, which a few of them go ahead and tell him to continue. He then says that he hopes he can trust them with this, and then he grew up in a small town where people were expected to behave a certain way and conform, and that he learned to keep things about himself to himself and not share with anyone. Thomas then, of course, assumes that Geoff is a closeted gay man and tells him that it's okay and just to let it out. Geoff then elaborates that the desire just got too much to bear and he gave in, and that he used to pick young men up and take them home, where Thomas, continuing, tells him there's nothing wrong with it. Geoff then elaborates that he would then torture them until they were dead, cut them up into pieces, and bury them under the house. Yeah, turns out he's a serial killer. They've been having a serial killer in their group the whole time. I honestly love it. This is one of the best points in this comic. This is such a wonderful twist. Completely unexpected. He then continues on, and he tried very hard to resist. But the night everything went crazy with the outbreak, he was on his way home, and he saw a guy who looked like he was drunk and stumbling along, and that he didn't intend on killing anybody then and there, but this just seemed too easy not to jump on. He took him home, got him chained up in his basement when the man came to and showed signs of infection, where he started taunting Geoff to actually kill him. Apparently Geoff panicked and couldn't do it and just left him there. Sydney then panics and has Patrick get behind her, where then Geoff exclaims that he would never do anything to Patrick and that he doesn't want to do any of those things to anyone in the group as he sees them as his friends, and that they accepted him and they're the only friends he's ever had. Stan then tells him, "We didn't know who you were," where Kittrick then jumps in as Geoff is fully starting to break down and tells him it's all going to be okay. He gives Sydney a look, Sydney accepts, and we get the narration that in the morning, Geoff and Kittrick took a walk, and Kittrick came back on his own. After that, they went out into the desert, and there is the end of part 6. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, this is a pretty wild issue. Like, the first time I read it, I was not expecting the twist that Geoff was going to be a serial killer. And I still don't really know how to take it or how to take Kittrick killing him. Like, I understand not wanting to have him in the group, but up until this point, he has literally not been a threat outside of his own stupidity and sentimentality that caused the incident that got Randall shot. Which now in hindsight, despite being in that situation, but at that point at least like 10 months in, would have absolutely known better. Although I find it funny that a mass outbreak of people essentially turning into psychopathic serial killers made an actual serial killer repent his ways. But then he gets killed for it anyways. I don't know what they're trying to say there. Also about the wounded Cross that got killed by one of his own. So I think we have a little bit more info on what Randall saw when the Cross got out of the car and tore the other one apart in the previous issue. So it's not just that they've got pent-up aggression, while that no doubt has to play into it some way, shape, or form, that they have to act out eventually. It also seems like anytime there is anything wrong, physically debilitating with the Crossed, the others will attack that one. Could also be more to it. I have my own little theory, but that'll have to be talked about if I cover other material from the series, like Cross Badlands. That's a whole other can of worms for another day. Anyways, we're just gonna move on and head into the last 3 issues of Crossed, so hang tight. Number 7. Let's get into it. So our first page opens with a face we haven't seen for a minute. Good old Horsecock. And him and his merry band of ruffians, as we can see, are in the desert. And they're singing a lovely little tune. Spirits as high as always. This song in particular is about how they love being bad guys. While they're doing this, Sydney and Stan look on in notable confusion. Stan commenting that he thinks he's seen everything now. Sydney in disbelief and questioning how a group that they saw from 2 months ago and over 1,000 miles away is here now in the desert. Stan questioning if they tracked us, where Sydney simply states, don't know, this might be bad. Like, what are you talking about? Obviously they followed you. They said they were going to come after you, and they did. Why else would they be there? Where we then cut to the rest of the group, shutting off a generator that is feeding a gas station they were trying to loot. Kelly is questioning if it's the same group before, Stan informing her that there is no mistaking this group, as Thomas sets up radios that they've apparently gotten a hold of. Stan questions why they're traveling on the road when he thought they were trying to stay off of it, and Sydney comments that the road will let them move faster, and they have hours before the Cross get out of the canyon, and the road as well will make it harder to track. They of course are questioning again if the group is actually following them, which as pointed out would be quite a coincidence if they just happened to wander in that direction. Duh. I mean, are they just stretching for time with this conversation? Because it's completely pointless. Later on that night, as they're still traveling along the road, they start noticing lights in the direction that they came from. They see that the light seems to be coming from an explosion or fire at the gas station, and are questioning what the Crossed are actually doing, and if they're just blowing up the gas station for fun, or to create light so they can search. What we actually see is that they are taking one of their own, and basically cooking them to eat. While they're in the process of doing this, the Stumpy, whatever you want to call him, starts making his usual noise to let him know that he is somehow aware of them. They then see through the distance the fire break off into multiple smaller fires as the Cross engage in pursuit. We then jump forward to a couple days later, where Stan narrates that they've only gotten a couple hours of sleep over 2 days, and that they've run out of water, and that he was starting to get scared because they've actually lost sight of the group pursuing him. Brett asks Kelly how long she's been blind, where she gives a sarcastic remark about totally being able to keep track of that. He then asks her if her other senses have gotten better, and she says not really, not enough to make a difference. This is all in part because Brett is questioning how the stumped Crossed is able to tell where they're at, despite not being able to see, speculating on whether he does have some sort of supernatural sense to detect them. Sydney then chimes in that if that's the case, they're completely screwed, but she doubts it, and that if any of the Crossed in that group beforehand were halfway decent trackers or worked in law enforcement, they would have been able to follow them. They then discuss that the map that they're using shows a river 5 miles ahead of where they're at, and they plan on filling up on water there. Brett then picks on Stan, much in the same way that Stan would pick on Joel, with Sydney commenting the same. We then cut to them at the river, with them further speculating on how the Crossed group is operating as they are, with Kelly chiming in that Thomas at least should give up on trying to understand them because you simply can't. While they're doing this, Brett is on the side of the river that they are crossing from, trying to keep watch, where him and Stan begin to bicker and engage in an argument when Brett has to jump off the cliff as the group has approached and starts opening fire on them. Both Kelly and Kittrick get hit, the bullet hitting Kelly's backpack and one striking Kittrick through the shoulder. Kittrick, when he is hit, knocks into Sydney, who is holding Patrick, who then falls into the river and gets dragged away in the current. Before she can attempt to go down the river after Patrick, Stan tells her to get across the river because there's no way he'll catch up to him in the water. They also start exchanging fire as they make their way across the river. We find out that Kelly is perfectly fine as the bullet didn't go through her backpack somehow, and that Kittrick has only been slightly wounded, and that he doesn't seem to be bleeding much. Sydney then takes off and tries to see if she can spot where Patrick has gone, while Thomas tries to bandage up Kittrick. Brett catches up with the rest of the group, and while he's complaining about what has just happened, a voice chimes in over the radio. One of the infected, presumably Horsecock, with Brett then freaking out that he dropped it when he fell off the cliff. The Crossed inform the group that they have Patrick, and they've done and are going to do the Crossed usual to him, all the while laughing and mocking. This sends Sydney into a rage, who goes charging off. Kittrick gets on the radio and demands that the Crossed put Patrick on, and that if they do have him and have done that, then they can get him talking, and that he wants to hear him. The voice then responds that they just killed him. Kittrick then calls this out, saying that they don't actually have anything, or they would have already proven it. While everyone is surprised at Kittrick's sudden outburst, Brett flies into disbelief as he sees Patrick running along the shoreline from a group of Crossed. At that point, Kittrick jumps up and yells at everyone to charge out, which they all promptly do, with Stan narrating that this moment was an absolute release for them, finally being able to actually fight back, where they promptly do, charging the Cross, chasing after Patrick, and promptly gun them down. Sydney then catches up to Patrick, where we then see Patrick himself has become infected, and Sydney is forced to promptly execute her own son. And obviously, the rest of the group is absolutely horrified. Kelly, obviously not being able to see what happened, is questioning Thomas, with Thomas not wanting to tell her, at least right away. And despite being labeled as a dick earlier, Brett shows some real humanity and asks everyone if they want to stop and attempt to bury Patrick, with Stan commenting if he really thinks Sydney even wants to look at him right now. The voice continues to cackle over the radio, in which Thomas, upset, abruptly smashes it. And we have the end of part 7. A very heavy issue. It's going to sound kind of messed up. And while I don't want people to take this as me saying Patrick's death is justified, because it obviously isn't. So we're looking at this as if this was a real event. Patrick is obviously just a kid. But his mom did have some comeuppance coming to her for, the whole mercilessly gunning down the children thing. The irony isn't lost on me that she got put in a situation where she had to do that to her own. And I'm not gonna lie, I kind of saw it coming. I kind of figured at some point this was going to happen. I mean, especially after Joel and the kids, it only felt natural that a tragedy on this level for Sydney and the group would have to happen. Doesn't make it any better, but we got 2 more. Let's go. Part 8. So we open up with a rather dour scene in the rain, and I'm not sure if Thomas is trying to crack a joke, but he states that at least they don't have to watch their language anymore, and then he immediately regrets saying that. Kelly then goes and comments that at least no one can track them in this, where Brett then comments that they shouldn't be so sure about that, because after what they experienced with Patrick, not only are these crossed very screwed up, mentally speaking, obviously, but they're clearly very intelligent, that they thought all that out just to mess with the survivor's head, and that when it comes to assuming what the crossed are capable of, all bets should be off. They then hit a river where they start to question whether they can go around or not, and that they gotta go now, because if they wait till after dark and don't make it across, they're obviously gonna slip and get hurt. We gotta head to later in the night when it is lightning and thundering out, and the group later on, trying to find another way around the river, has found a crashed Chinook helicopter. We get from Stan through narration that this is the first time in a while it seems Sydney woke up and came to her old self, if just for a moment, to clear out the helicopter, and then go back in her daze. Kelly then starts inquiring if she's been eating and has changed her clothes at all, with Thomas commenting that none of them can get near her without her looking like she's going to kill them. Brett, while this is going on, is fiddling with an assault rifle they have found, while also complaining to Stan about the dog being interested in him. Stan tells him this is because the dog has shitty taste, and this starts another little bickering match between the two, where Brett comments on how they're all so mopey, with Stan rebuting that, well yeah, someone they care about lost their entire reason for living, and Brett calls him out for only pretending to care about the kid because he's into Sydney, where then they're about to get into a fist fight, where Kittrick chimes in and lets them know that the assault rifle has a grenade launcher attachment and that he can tell it's loaded, which then promptly breaks up the fight. Stan starts rummaging through the helicopter, where he finds little of interest until he finds a Bible that has been written in by the person whose body is laying inside the helicopter. Got to mention that there is a corpse that has been rendered down to a skeleton inside the helicopter. Stan starts reading it, and we find out that the body belonged to a captain in the United States Army, who was on a mission at the start of the outbreak to escort a group of civilian specialists to 2 different nuclear power plants, where they were set to shut down the facilities, and that other operations like this were being mounted across the country. Then go into detail on the mission itself, how they encountered the hostiles, and unless the hostiles, i.e. the infected, were in very large numbers, they didn't pose much of a threat to a military squad. He then also talks about how during the entirety of the mission, the specialists just kept bickering amongst themselves like children on the best ways to go about shutting down the plants. Murray then comments that because they were arguing like little kids, they weren't paying attention at all to what was actually happening, and explains that they flew out to somewhere in the desert, whereas they told the specialists they were actually taking them to a fortified base, and then promptly executed the specialist, saying that the mission's orders were to do this to prevent the specialist from becoming infected and the information they have getting out there for the cross to reverse the shutdowns. And learn that shortly after that the helicopter crashed in a thunderstorm, where the captain broke both his legs and instructed the squad and helicopter crew to go ahead and leave him behind, and then ends his confession asking if he did the right thing. We then cut to the next day after the storm, where Stan narrates that for the next week they traveled, Sydney did not say a single thing to anybody, and that it felt like this is just how things were going to be from now on. We learn as the group is camping that Kelly seems to be at least regaining some of her vision back, as she can tell when Thomas is waving his hand in front of her face, at least vaguely. While this is going on, Brett kicks the dog, where Thomas and Kelly question him. Why is he being a complete asshole? Where he explains that the dog won't leave him alone whenever he tries to eat. Stan tells him not to kick the dog. Kelly then chimes in that it's not the dog's fault and the dog's just hungry. Brett then basically says that's the dog's problem. Of course, Kelly harps on him for being cruel. Of course, he's saying it's just a dog. The dog goes for his food again. He kicks it. Stan tells him not to kick the dog again. He tells Stan to F off, where he promptly gets shot in the chest by Stan, and then falls over dead before anybody can say anything. Kelly starts to panic from the gunshot, with Thomas trying to calm her down, telling her it's over. Stan then narrates as we see them traveling on that they traveled for 2 days with everybody being completely silent. And then see when they're at their next campsite, Stan approaches Sydney and tells her he's gonna say some things that she's not gonna like. And the main one being that he thinks she needs to go back and bury Patrick's body. She, of course, without saying anything, just gives him a look, and he offers to come with her, and that they can come up with a dogleg course to cut around the cross, and that he'll attempt to make things decent for her at the burial. As he continues to try to talk her into it, but then she questions if she actually needs it, or does he? He, of course, gets defensive and says this isn't actually about Brett, shows her the confession of the military captain that he read, and that it helped him think this through, and that the main reason why he's doing this isn't for himself, but because he doesn't want to see Sydney become inhuman. As he puts it, I don't want what's in you gone from the world. Where then we cut ahead to a future time where Stan is giving Thomas a list of locations to go to. Wait 2 days at each of them as potential meetup points. He then asks what happens if you miss all 5. He then tells him just to go north without them anyways. Obviously, Sydney has agreed to the plan, if you haven't caught on by this point. Anywho, Thomas then tells him he thinks they're doing the right thing because it makes little point to get to Alaska if there's nothing left of them when they get there. He then tries to give one last fuck you in a cute way, but he can't think of anything. As Stan says goodbye to the rest of the group, we get a narration that he never could figure out if him and Thomas were actually friends, and that he doubts if the apocalypse hadn't happened, they never would have, and as well as the realization that he never would have met any of those people. He then states that this isn't the last time he's going to see Thomas, but this is the way that he likes to remember Thomas. That isn't some foreshadowing. And with that, we are done with part 8. Last part. Here we go. Let's just get right into it. Here we are. Last issue, number 9. We open up with Stan, Sydney, and the dog back in the desert where they have come upon the site where Patrick died, finding the corpses of the cross that they killed before, and as you can see, clearly a desiccated state, so it has been quite a good bit of time since Patrick has died. Stan wraps what's left of his body up in a sleeping bag, takes it up to Sydney to be buried, where she does, mourns to herself, and tells Stan that there's nothing really special about her. Her grandfather taught her how to use guns and how to protect herself. She got married because she was stupid and blind, and defended herself once it dawned on her that nobody else was going to. And from then on, she just kept moving with Patrick. All there really is to her was that she had enough discipline to not get lazy, and that's it. And then cut forward to where they are in a church taking shelter, commenting on how the priest must have been shocked when the remains that we see put up on a cross indicate something quite foul. As the night comes on and they prepare dinner, he asks her how she's doing. She doesn't know, but she thinks him saying that she needed to bury Patrick. She then states that she feels like it was all for nothing, a waste of time, especially killing the children. Stan then comments that just because people died doesn't mean the things that they did for others were wasted. Kind of feel it's the problem with the whole killing of the kids. Kind of feel like it just undercuts everything. This is a moment too. Sydney then remarks how they should probably take the priest down, and Stan agrees. We then cut back to our other group, Kelly, Thomas, and Kittrick. Kelly is telling Thomas that there's still a chance that they'll meet him at the third meeting spot. And we find out it's been over a month since they've split up. And Thomas is very uncomfortable that Sydney is not around to make decisions. When Kittrick chimes in that they're being followed. Obviously, judging by his face, Thomas already assumes the worst, but he goes ahead and asks if it's Sydney and Stan, which Patrick confirms that it's Horsecock's group. Tells them not to act like anything's different and to keep walking, and that he's gonna stay behind like he's given up in order to draw them out and buy Thomas and Kelly as much time as possible, stating that he doesn't really want to live anymore and that he's been kidding himself trying to find a way back into the world and that he's had enough. He then drops all his gear, drops to his knees with a pistol hidden behind his back, and says softly to himself, "Be with you soon, I promise," as Horsecock's gang approaches. As they approach, Stumpy takes notice of him, and they immediately start opening fire on Kittrick, who is hit in the stomach, but is able to return fire and at least hit one of them. We then jump to Sydney and Stan, who have gotten in range that they can hear the gunfire. Stan saying that he hears the shooting, and Sydney remarking that they missed them at the second location and that they shouldn't be catching up to them this soon, with Stan pointing out that they've got Kelly with them so they can't move as fast. We go back to Kittrick, who is bleeding out on the ground as Face comes up and hacks off his arm. While he's writhing in pain, Face tries to pull off his pants when Horsecock approaches, demanding that he stop and just kill him, smacking him with his titular weapon. Face gets angry and demands that he wants his fun as the rest of the cross tear Kittrick apart. Face tries to talk back to Horsecock, and Horsecock unloads on him, appearing to beat him to death and taking the Stumpy crossed with him, and demanding that the rest of the cross chase after the others. We go to Sydney now, with Thomas in a panic, questioning if they got Kittrick, Thomas stating simply that they must have. Sydney and Stan inch their way ever closer, trying to catch up. Thomas telling Kelly that they've almost gotten to the tree line and that they'll wait in there. They take shelter behind a fallen tree, where Thomas tries to get Kelly to start holding her breath so the Stumpy one can't hear them. Cross get awfully close but pass by them, where they end up waiting an hour afterward. They make their way out of a forest clearing, where they then find a cliff on one side, where they then try to formulate a plan of where to go next to avoid the cross. As Sydney and Stan come running up to what looks to be the cliffside, Horsecock jumps out, having finally caught up. He smacks Thomas to the ground, Thomas dropping his gun in the process, as the rest of the cross now start to approach. Horsecock grabs Kelly and starts to taunt her and question her about where the rest of the group is, as well as saying he's got a present for her. When at the last second, before he can actually harm Kelly, Thomas leaps onto Horsecock with his glasses broken and unable to find his gun. He does the only thing he can think of in a split second and bites deep into Horsecock's flesh, ripping a solid chunk of his neck out. Horsecock collapses, gurgling with blood, as Thomas does everything to spit out the flesh. Kelly manages to find the gun, and working together, they finish off the stumped cross. And with more cross now approaching Thomas and Kelly, he tells her to run while the virus starts to take hold of him. Kelly, not understanding what is going on, tells Thomas just to shoot her and then he can get away without her. That she loves him, he's been so good to her and so kind, but he's done enough. He tells her he won't ever leave her, that she is his sweet little sister. And then as the virus takes hold, he states simply, "God, it's like venom, but you want more." He tells her they're nearly there, and then we see that Stan and Sydney are on the opposite side of the cliff, unable to do anything but watch helplessly as Thomas and Kelly plunge to their deaths. We get to some time later where Sydney and Stan are still watching the surviving group of Crossed. Stan asks her what they're doing, which apparently is not much. He suggests to see if they move on tomorrow and try to go around them if they don't. She then suggests going down and wiping out the group. Before Stan can question this, she states that it's just them and us. If there were any other Crossed in the area, the shooting done with Kittrick would have drawn them in by now, and that if the big one was some kind of next step in their evolution, they don't want whatever he was teaching them to start to spread. Stan then finally voices his objection, saying simply that they're still lethal. Duh. But she points out that they've lost their early warning system. When they go to do their ambush, they see that the one called Face is apparently still alive and is attempting to organize the group, where we then get some satisfaction and finally get to see this annoying, disgusting Cross get what's coming to him, as apparently Horsecock did not do a good enough job and promptly gets a round straight through his chest, whereupon the rest of the group, before they can really respond in their mindless charging, are gunned down. Thomas shares this thought on the Crossed during this moment. Quote, "There was no great secret to the Crossed. I'd never seen one do anything a human being couldn't think of doing, hadn't thought of doing, hadn't done. They were all awful aspects of humanity, magnified 100,000-fold, but they were nothing more. Where did they come from? Us. They were every brute, every sadist, every rapist, PDF file, renderer, torturer, every ethnic cleanser, serial murderer, zealot, tyrant, holy killer, every terrorist and bomber, every smirking criminal in office, every shitty, cruel parent who should never have had kids, and every bad, debasing thing that men and women have to do to deal with evil. The marks slashed across our souls. End quote. We then find Stumpy lying on the ground, saying that it was going to be beautiful, right as Stan finishes them off with one final shot. He then states that they came to the last hill. Not really the last hill. Obviously, they'd have plenty more to go over. They're still not in Alaska. But it felt like the end for their conflict. The snow had already started to fall in, and that the chill felt like a barrier behind them, and they began to start to relax and look back. Where then Stan starts to question what was waiting for them in the mountains beyond, and how would they live? Would they run into more Crossed like they had just dealt with? And if there was any redemption to be found for them. And here are the final lines of Crossed. So we walked down the hill into all those fears and maybes, all that sorrow, nothing certain in our lives except the frozen earth beneath our feet. And that is the end of Crossed, Volume 1. All in all, I think it salvages itself. I think once it tones back on being excessively brutal, it gets a lot better. Some of the quality in Ennis's writing starts to shine through. But one thing before I get into the rest of the critique proper. So in the original part 2 video, that is if you're watching a big cut of it all together, someone commented, Anthony Jordan Movies and Gaming 86, pointed out that there's a bit of a plot hole back when we first met Horsecock and his group at the Broken Bridge. While Horsecock and his crew were sitting there, Sydney and Stan could have just shot them. Which is a very good point. They could have at least gotten a couple shots off and taken Horsecock or maybe Face with Stumpy down. Because at least at the time, all they had were handguns and a shotgun. Sydney and Stan could have totally outranged him and at least taken a couple of them down, which would have helped. And as we see with this final issue, turns out the one thing the group had been avoiding doing the whole time, the one thing they chided Joel for wanting to do, was the correct answer after all. As Stan puts it, the Crossed are nothing more than the worst people have to offer. There's nothing really new about them. And in a way, it kind of points out a giant flaw with this series that, if you actually think about it, you remove the whole viral aspect to the Crossed, they just kind of become crazy post-apocalyptic raiders. Same type you see in like Fallout and other media. Nothing really special about them. Put that out of the way. The dog. What purpose did the dog serve? The dog did nothing other than give an excuse for Stan to kill Brett. And speaking of Brett, there's no way it justified shooting him. Like, yeah, he was kicking the dog, but that could have been resolved a different way. Stan was just looking for the excuse. I mean, the biggest critique I have overall is that the whole messaging about trying to find your humanity gets undercut multiple steps of the way. Not just the thing with the kids, which I will get into here shortly, but Stan just as a character overall doesn't really have any redeeming values. And because the series takes so long getting to the actual plot with Horsecock chasing down the survivors, which ends up being the back half of the volume, we don't get a whole lot of time for stuff. It's all over the place. I mean, there's tons of characters that serve little purpose and don't really need to exist. Like, what was the point of Geoff? Or, what was her name that fell off the bridge? Or the red hat guy? There's a lot of characters that serve little to no purpose other than to get killed off. And now that we're at it, the whole issue with the kids. I feel like the messaging of this series would have gone a lot better had we presented with more gray things, like Joel's family, for instance, and none of them stopping to help them. Like the kids, it's just there was better ways, and also the fact that there are panels you can read where the teacher flat out tells them kids hadn't done anything yet. And yeah, even though she showed them how to do the trap, they hadn't done it yet. And is it really any different than Sydney taking Patrick with her everywhere she went, when she got into gunfights, when she was observing the cross? Like, you're gonna sit there and tell me that kid isn't aware of what's going on and isn't picking up on anything? Like, come on. And then there's when they're at the church and they're basically having like a sort of come to Jesus, like, why has this all happened moment? And then it's underpinned with them constantly making jokes about the priest on the cross. It's like, are you taking this seriously or not? And again, when Ennis gets on point and is focused, his writing is decent, especially in the fact that, like, it gets you to turn the page and see what happens next. But in a lot of ways, he really undercuts himself. And I think with that, that's going to be the end of what I have to say about Crossed. As far as its objectionable content, I don't really think it's as bad as people made it out to be. Later entries in the series, other volumes, definitely do hit that point. Really, the thing that I think is bad about it is the meandering, the lack of time we have to really establish relationships with the characters. Like, for example, why are Thomas and Kelly so close? We don't really get much for that other than she asked him to watch out for her. And the whole thing between Thomas and Sydney, which I didn't really get into much, because what is there to their relationship? It's just Stan trying to flirt with her until eventually she holds his hand at the end. Like, there's nothing to it, and it honestly feels forced. All in all, like, it's decent, it's entertaining enough to read through, but as far as, like, if someone's gonna go out and, like, actually buy physical copies, unless, like, you're just dead set on collecting Crossed, or, like, you just want to collect all of Garth Ennis's work, absolutely not worth it. Not saying it's bad, it's just not worth, especially nowadays, trying to hunt down and pay what you're gonna have to pay for physical copies, unless, like, you're dead set collector. Other than that, that's all I have to say. Thank you for watching if you got this far. If you liked the video, please like. And if there are any other comics, manga, graphic novels, etc. you want me to cover, or you want me to cover more Crossed, go ahead and let me know. Totally open to it. Thank you, and have a nice day.